For some background, I lived in this house between the ages of 3 and 13. It was a semi-detached home that backed directly onto a church and cemetery. At the time, it didn't seem like a big deal, but looking back, it definitely did add something to the atmosphere. Now, a lot of different things happened while I lived there, and over the years my family and I have compared notes and realized we weren't imagining them individually. Let me take you to my earliest memories involving the basement, which wasn't very large, just a bathroom, a laundry room, and a small space where my brother and I would hang out, play video games, or watch TV. We never felt like we were in danger, but there was always this underlying tension when we were down there alone. On a few occasions, I remember feeling sudden bursts of cold air right near the bottom of the stairs, just outside the bathroom. At the time, I didn't think anything of it. I was a kid. I didn't have a framework to interpret that kind of thing. Years later, after we moved out, my family started talking more openly about that house. One night, my dad brought up the basement specifically. He used that bathroom every morning before work because he had an early commute and kept his work clothes down there. He told me there were multiple times when he would be down there getting ready and could feel the air move over him almost like something passing by. Most of the time he ignored it, but on a few occasions it made him uncomfortable enough that he spoke out loud, saying something like he wasn't there to bother anyone, he was just getting ready for work. He said when he did that, the feeling would fade almost immediately, and that's when we realized we had both experienced something similar in that same area. Another thing that happened involved the front door. When I was around 11, my mum went back to work, and I became responsible for walking my brother to school in the morning and locking up afterward. I was constantly reminded not to forget, and I never did. One day when I came home at lunch to let our dog out, I felt uneasy as I approached the house. When I got to the door, it was unlocked and slightly open, not wide open, but just enough that you could see inside. I immediately went to a neighbor, and they came in with me to check the house. No one was there, and nothing had been disturbed. The same thing happened again about a year later, almost exactly the same way. Both times I remember rushing through, letting the dog out, and leaving as fast as I could because I felt like I wasn't supposed to be there. When my dad told me about it later, he shared something that happened when I was too young to remember. We had been coming home from a New Year's party, and as they were driving up the street, my dad saw the light in their bedroom turn on and off again. When we got to the house, he left my mum, my brother and me in the car and went to check. The front door was unlocked and open. He grabbed a baseball bat and searched the entire house, but no one was inside. Things got stranger after that, especially with my brother. He started saying that at night he could see a woman in a long white dress, walking from the top of the stairs down the bottom and then disappearing. The staircase had a balcony at the top and curved down with 2 small landings, so you could see movement clearly from different angles. At first, I didn't believe him at all. Eventually, he told my mum, and she didn't dismiss it outright. Much later, after we had moved out, she told us she had seen something too. One night, she saw a woman in a white dress standing on the balcony at the top of the stairs. She never told us at the time because she didn't want to frighten us. I had my own experience connected to that area. One afternoon, I was in my brother's room, which faced the balcony, playing inside a Scooby-Doo tent we had. I ended up falling asleep in there. When I woke up, I rolled over and saw a woman in a white dress and a man in a suit with a top hat dancing together just outside the doorway near the balcony. They weren't moving quickly, just slowly turning like they were in their own space. I remember feeling calm, not scared at all. I looked away for a second and then looked back, and they were gone. It could have been a dream, but the image stuck with me very clearly. Another experience happened at night when I was in my own room. I always had trouble falling asleep, so I would lie awake for hours sometimes. One night, I felt unusually restless and had the urge to close my bedroom door, which I normally left slightly open. My bed was right next to it, so I leaned over to reach it. As I did, I noticed a large shadowy figure standing just outside the doorway. I froze completely. It didn't have clear features. but it had the shape and size of a person, larger than my dad and definitely larger than my younger brother. I started calling out for my dad, hoping it was him, but the figure didn't move at all. I called again, and there was still no response. Eventually, I pulled the door shut and turned away, trying to hide under the covers. A few moments later, my dad came in after hearing me call for him. He said he had been asleep, and so had my mum. That figure stayed exactly where it was until I closed the door. There are a few more things that happened in that house, including one experience my dad had involving a similar shadow figure, but that one could be explained away by sleep paralysis. Even so, the similarities between what he described and what I saw have always stood out. I guess that's what happens when you live next to a cemetery. This is a true story that happened on May 15th, 2006, in a small town in Illinois where I grew up. I had always believed in ghosts to some extent because of the house I grew up in. For the first 10 years of my life, my family lived in an old place where strange, unexplainable things happened pretty regularly. I never actually saw anything there myself, but it definitely shaped how I thought about that kind of thing. The first time I ever saw something I couldn't explain happened years later, in a cemetery I used to visit often. It was an old cemetery on the edge of town. I used to go there just to walk around and clear my head. It might sound weird, but it was peaceful, and when my kids were younger, I even brought them along sometimes because there were gophers all over the place, and they liked watching them pop in and out of the ground. By the time this happened, my kids were older and had lost interest in going, so I would go by myself. I usually went in the afternoon around 2 or 3, walked a few laps through the ground and then left. On that particular day, I got there later than usual, around 4:30. I had had a stressful day and just needed some quiet, so I didn't think much about it at the time, even though it meant it would be getting dark soon. I always parked my car near the back of the cemetery, and before going out I had a habit of scanning the area to make sure no one else was around. It was a pretty isolated place, and I didn't like the idea of being alone there with strangers. That day, like every other day, I didn't see anyone. There's something important about the layout of that cemetery. There's only one real way in or out, through the front entrance. The entire place is surrounded by a tall fence with barbed wire along the top. The back section has a shorter fence, but beyond that is a steep drop down towards a river. It's not something anyone could just climb over or use as an exit. I walked around for a while, stopping here and there to read headstones, and after about an hour and a half I went back to my car to sit for a minute. It was starting to get to twilight, and I thought about leaving but decided to do one more loop before heading out. Like always, I check the area again before walking off and still don't see anyone. I haven't gone far, maybe a few blocks from where my car was parked, when I suddenly hear a voice call from behind me. "Hey!" It was loud and clear and definitely a man's voice. I stopped immediately. It didn't make sense. There was no way someone could have gotten behind me that quickly without me noticing. I had just been at the back of the cemetery minutes before, and it had been completely empty. I turned around. There was a tall, thin man standing there, wearing what looked like some kind of dark blue uniform. It was dim, but I could see him clearly enough to make out his shape and the way he was dressed. As soon as he saw me look at him, he raised his hand and waved, and then started walking towards me quickly. Everything about it felt uncomfortable. My first thought wasn't anything paranormal. I thought it was an actual person, and that scared me more. The way he appeared out of nowhere and began moving towards me without saying anything was setting off alarm bells in my head, and I turned and ran. I cut through the headstones to take the fastest path back to my car. I got in, locked the doors and started the engine, and then sat there for a moment trying to calm down, and decided I want to see who that was and where he'd gone. I drove through the cemetery slowly, scanning every path, but there was no one there. I went through the entire place, again and then again. Nothing. That's when it hit me. What I saw didn't make sense. When I first saw him, he looked completely solid. Nothing in the way people describe a ghost. He looked like a real person. But there was no possible way for him to disappear that quickly. And most importantly, there wasn't anywhere for him to go. He had been near the back, not far from where my car was parked. I had run straight back and immediately started driving. If he'd have kept walking, I should have seen him somewhere along the path. But he was just gone. I never returned to the cemetery after that evening. I wanted to share this somewhere because I still don't have a reasonable explanation for what happened that night. And honestly, it's been bothering me ever since. This happened a few months ago. A friend of mine had heard that the northern lights might be visible in our area and asked if I wanted to drive out into the countryside to try and see them. It sounded like a good exercise to get out of the city for a while, so we left after dark and spent a few hours driving around, stopping occasionally to scan the sky for what looked like a good vantage point. After a while, it became pretty clear we weren't going to see anything. As we were deciding what to do next, my friend mentioned that we were close to her hometown, and that she had been wanting to visit the local cemetery for a while to find some family graves. She had been doing genealogy research and knew roughly where they were. And it was a clear, warm night, and since the whole trip had been kind of a letdown so far, we figured we might as well make it worth it and stop there. We pulled onto a dirt road next to the cemetery and walked in. It didn't take long to find the graves she was looking for. She took a few pictures, and then we decided to just wander a bit. She was walking ahead, her phone flashlight on, lighting the ground so we wouldn't step on anything, and almost as soon as we got further in, I started to feel off. It wasn't fear exactly, more like a steady growing sense of anxiety that didn't match the situation. I've worked in cemeteries before as part of archaeological projects, including documenting and mapping of older graveyards, so I'm used to being in these environments even at night. I've always found them quiet and calming even. But this place felt different. I kept getting the sense that someone was behind me. I caught myself turning around over and over, expecting to see someone standing there. I tried to ignore it and chalk it up to my own anxiety. That's always the problem. It's hard to tell when a feeling is just in your head and when it isn't. After a while, we realized it was getting close to 1 a.m. and decided to head back. My friend's car was already in sight, and she was a few steps ahead of me on the path when it happened. I suddenly got that same spike of anxiety again, stronger this time, and I thought I heard footsteps running up behind me. I started to turn, but before I could fully react, something hit me in the back. The impact landed right between my shoulder blades. It wasn't a light push. It had real force behind it, like someone had actually thrown themselves into me, and it knocked me forward hard enough that I fell face first onto the ground. As I tried to push myself back up, I felt that weight again, pressing down on my shoulder and forcing me back down. At the same time, my friend had turned around. She later told me she had also heard something running up behind us. She saw me go down, and as she ran to me, she said my sweatshirt looked like it was being pressed inward, like someone had their hand on my back. She grabbed my arm and pulled me up, and right as she did, the pressure disappeared completely. We didn't wait to figure anything out. We ran straight to the car, got in, locked the door, and left immediately. Neither of us said anything for the first few minutes. Eventually, she asked me what had happened. I told her it felt like someone had shoved me. She said she knew because she had seen it. But there had been nothing there. We went through every possible explanation we could think of. It wasn't a person. There was nowhere for someone to come from or run to without being seen. I didn't trip. I clearly felt something hit me twice. It wasn't the wind. The air had been completely still at night, and it didn't seem like an animal either. There aren't any animals in that area that could hit with that kind of force and stay completely unseen, especially with her flashlight on me all the time. Nothing we came up with made sense. A few minutes later, after the initial adrenaline wore off, I started to notice pain in my back, right where I had been hit. It wasn't like a bruise. It felt sharp and stinging, almost like I had brushed against something irritating. I mentioned it to my friend, pulled over to check. She turned on the interior light and pulled back my hoodie. Just as she stopped, she said, "What is that?" She took a picture and then showed me. The skin between my shoulder blades was red, and small blisters had already started to form. Over the next few days, they got worse before they healed. It looked like a burn, but I hadn't touched anything, and my clothing wasn't damaged at all. Whatever hit me left a mark, and I didn't sleep well that night. Every time I started to drift off, I had this insane feeling that someone was standing right behind me, and that kept jolting me awake. Since then, it's been harder to ignore. I already deal with trauma from past assault, and there's nothing especially unsettling about an experience like this where there's nothing clear to point to, nothing to prepare for or avoid. And on top of that, it brought back recurring dreams I used to have when I was younger. They had mostly stopped in my 20s, but after that night they began again. The same presence, the same feeling of being watched or targeted by something I don't understand in some of those dreams now. It's not abstract anymore. I don't know what happened that night. There's no rational explanation I know. But if there's one I'm missing, I'd love some enlightenment, because I haven't been able to shake it since. Years ago, I lived in a very old small town on a cul-de-sac which had a cemetery at the end. When I first moved in, the landlord told me that a lot of the people in the area had experienced a lot of ghostly activity, but that he personally didn't have any experiences in the house I was renting. Months went by, and I also didn't have any experiences, but then I started to see what looked like a black figure going through the house at times, and mostly in my peripheral vision. There were times where I would be laying in bed watching TV, and I would see this figure or silhouette move very quickly past the doorway. Because I was already told about the activity that my neighbors had experienced, I was never really bothered by it. It wasn't until a year after I moved into the house that I had an experience that really scared me. I was home alone and went into the bathroom to shower. My cat was in the bathroom with me, and I noticed her looking under the door, and she started moving her ear and swaying her tail, which she usually did when she heard something unfamiliar. I immediately locked the door because I got an uneasy feeling. I then heard a man say, "Hello?" I thought maybe it was my dad getting home, so I said, "Dad?" But no one said anything back. Then the knob to the door to the bathroom started turning itself, as if someone were trying to open the door. I got into the shower and called my boyfriend to ask if he was home, and he said he wasn't. So I called my sister to ask if she was home, and she also said no. I started to panic and called my boyfriend back and explained what was going on. He told me to stay in the bathroom with a door locked until I heard his voice telling me to open the door. All of a sudden, I started hearing what sounded like my house being ransacked. The doors were being opened and slammed closed. It sounded like things were being thrown and broken. I was thinking someone broke into my house and was robbing me and destroying everything in the process. About 5 minutes later, I heard my boyfriend telling me to open the door. I immediately started crying because I was expecting to walk out to a disaster. But when I opened the door, nothing was touched. He said the front door was locked and he searched the house and no one was there. What I was hearing was so real and so scary. I have no clue what it was and still feel so afraid about that experience. I don't understand how I could hear all of that and yet nothing be touched. This happened back in October, and it was the first time anything like this had ever happened to me in broad daylight. I was on vacation with my parents in Salem, which had been my top choice for years. I've always been into creepy history, especially the Salem witch trials. So when my parents gave me the option between Rhode Island or Salem for my graduation trip, there was no debate. We went the week before Halloween, which thankfully meant the whole place hadn't been overrun yet. I had the entire trip planned out in detail, and one of the places I really wanted to visit was the Howard Street Cemetery. I originally wanted to go to the old Burying Point Cemetery, but it was closed for renovations at the time. Howard Street has its own reputation though. It's believed to be the location where Giles Corey was pressed to death during the trials, which already gave the place that creepy atmosphere before we even got there. When we arrived, I did my usual thing. I enjoy taking pictures of older gravestones, especially the ones that are broken down or partially covered. If I see one buried under leaves or debris, I'll clear it off before taking a picture. It just feels respectful, like you're acknowledging that someone is still there. I ended up doing that with a few graves while we were walking around. At one point, I noticed another woman into the cemetery, but I didn't really pay attention to her after that. I was focused on taking photos and just being in the moment. Eventually, my parents started heading towards the exit, so I followed behind them, still looking around and taking a few last pictures. And right before we left, I felt something grab my arm. Not brush against it, not a light tap. It felt like a hand wrapping around my arm, gentle but very deliberate, and it caught me completely off guard. I don't like being touched, so my immediate reaction was to turn around, assuming it was the woman I had seen earlier. There was no one there. The cemetery behind me was empty. The area outside the fence was empty. My parents were a few steps ahead of me, and whatever grabbed me had come from behind. There wasn't anyone close enough for it to make sense. My mum noticed I stopped and asked what was wrong. I told her I thought someone had grabbed me, maybe that woman. She immediately said the woman had already left a while ago. And at that point she didn't even hesitate. She just grabbed my arm and started pulling me towards the exit. She doesn't mess around with anything even remotely paranormal, and she clearly didn't want to stick around. The weirdest part is that it didn't feel aggressive at all. There was no force behind it, no sense of anger or threat. If anything, it felt like whoever or whatever it was didn't want me to leave. I've gone over it a lot since then, trying to make sense of it. The only explanation I can come up with are either something in the cemetery acknowledging what I was doing, or that it was more personal. Part of me wonders if it had something to do with the graves I cleared off. Maybe it was someone connected to one of them, reacting to the fact someone took a moment to acknowledge their resting place instead of treating it like a backdrop. The cemetery wasn't especially well cared for, and there were empty bottles and trash scattered around, so it stood out that someone was being respectful. The other possibility is something my mum brought up afterwards. My aunt passed away from cancer years ago, and it hit me hard. She was a huge influence on me growing up, especially with my interest in anything dark or unusual. She loved anything related to witches, which makes the timing and location feel strange. At the very least, her ashes were scattered somewhere along the Massachusetts coast, not far from where we were. The idea that it could have been her isn't something I can prove, and I'm not saying that's what it was, but the feeling of the grab, how calm and familiar it felt, makes it hard to completely dismiss. Either way, I don't entirely know what it was, but I know it was paranormal at any rate. I'm an Eagle Scout, and I spent a lot of time camping over the years. One place I kept going back to was First Landing State Park. It used to be called Seashore State Park. There are a lot of stories tied to the land, especially about the Native American tribes who lived there long before anything else was built. People talk a lot about the burial grounds on the trail side of the park, which are fenced off now and no one goes in there. And the general consensus is that you leave that area alone. One night, a few friends and I were at one of the campsites we always tried to book. It was a quiet night with the cicadas humming in the background. We were sitting around the fire, telling ghost stories and trying to frighten each other, when eventually we got bored and decided to go for a walk, maybe to head towards the beach. It was around 1 in the morning when we started noticing lights in the trees. At first it was nothing unusual, just small dim flickerings between the branches. We assumed fireflies and didn't pay it much attention. But the further we walked in, the more of them there were. Not just 1 or 2 here or there, but enough that it started to feel bizarre. They weren't lighting up in that random blinking pattern you'd expect either. I guess you could say it felt more deliberate, and for some reason we ended up crossing Shore Drive and heading towards the area where the burial grounds are. As we got closer, the atmosphere changed significantly. It got cooler. It felt contained, like stepping into a different pocket of air, and at the same time the lights we'd just seen stopped completely. We stopped maybe 10 steps short of it, and no one said anything for a minute. Then one of us quietly said that we should probably just leave it alone. We stood there for a moment, kind of awkwardly, and then someone muttered a quick, "Thank you," under their breath. We all followed suit in our own way, and turned around and began heading back. During the walk back, it felt different. It wasn't just that we were on edge, it actually felt like we were being moved along. Not like pushed or anything, but more sort of encouraged to keep going, although no one said anything. I've been back to that park plenty of times since then, and I've had other moments there that I can't really explain away. I've seen shapes moving through the trees at night that don't match anything solid. I've heard what sounds like distant drums and low chanting when everything should be completely quiet, and footsteps when no one else is around. What's strange is that it's never felt threatening. Unsettling, certainly, but never hostile. I've taken friends with different backgrounds over the years, including some with native ancestry, and almost all of them have said the same thing without prompting. It's still one of my favorite places to camp, but I don't mess around near this side of the park anymore. And if you go at night, maybe you'll find out what I'm talking about. About 16 years ago, I was filming a low-budget horror movie in a very old historic cemetery. We had permission. It was late at night and extremely dark. There were no nearby streetlights or buildings, so without our equipment, the cemetery would have been in total darkness. For one shot, we had a very simple lighting setup, a regular light bulb inside a paper lantern to soften the light. Very low-budget filmmaking. But for the shot we needed more brightness, so we removed the paper lantern. We now had a hot bare bulb and nowhere convenient to place it. The only flat surface nearby was on the top of a large headstone. We all felt a little weird about putting it there, but it seemed harmless enough, so we carefully placed the bulb on top of the stone and rolled camera. When I called action, the light suddenly dimmed. Not flickering or going out, mind you, it just noticeably dimmed. The strange thing was the bulb wasn't connected to a dimmer switch, and I'm pretty sure it wasn't a dimmable bulb anyway. So we picked the bulb off the headstone, and immediately, everyone noticed that it returned to full brightness. To test it, we placed the bulb on the headstone again, and the light dimmed. At this point, we started checking everything: power source, cables, bulb, connections, but nothing explained why the brightness changed only when it was sitting on that headstone. One of the crew members looked down at the grave marker, read the name engraved on it aloud, and jokingly but politely asked if we could film our scene there. We stood there for a moment in silence and then placed the bulb back on the headstone, and this time it stayed fully bright. We called action again, and the light never dimmed. When we wrapped up for the night, we thanked the potential spirit just in case and packed up our equipment. To this day, I still wonder if it was just a strange coincidence, or if whoever was buried there just wanted a little bit of respect. I've never really had an explanation for the following story, and I've always been pretty skeptical when it comes to anything paranormal. Let me share it with you. A few years ago, I was out at night with some friends, and one of us had the idea to go into the town's graveyard. None of us actually expected anything to happen, but we went anyway, mostly just to mess around and scare ourselves a little. We walked in and headed directly to the middle of the cemetery. We had barely been there a minute when one of my friends suddenly screamed. It was loud enough that it instantly set everyone off, and I turned to look at her, and she said she had just seen something move really fast behind us crossing the path. She couldn't really describe it clearly, just that it was quick and low and definitely there. And that was enough for us. We panicked immediately and started running towards the nearest exit without even questioning it. While I was running, something happened that I can't explain. I felt something pass me on my right side. It wasn't just a vague feeling either. It was close. At the same time, I heard footsteps in the leaves. They were fast and matching our pace, and it sounded like someone running alongside us just out of sight. It was the weirdest part, because it almost felt like I could see it, even though I couldn't, like my brain was trying to fill in the shape. So anyway, we got out of the graveyard pretty quickly after that, and did not stop running until we were a good distance away. Once we finally slowed down, we started talking about what had just happened, trying to piece it together. The same friend who had screamed first told us what she saw more clearly. She said whatever it was had come up on her left side, crossed the path behind us, and then kept moving in the same direction we were running. She specifically said it passed right by me on my right side. And the weird part is, that is exactly where I heard and felt someone move next to me. She wasn't guessing or trying to match what I said either. She told her version first, and then I lined it up almost perfectly with my own experience. None of us saw a full figure. Nothing you could point to and say it was that. But it's freaky that we both experienced something similar and had matching stories in that graveyard. My friends and I used to have a paranormal research group. We had heard stories of an old abandoned graveyard. It was on a hill overlooking the PD River in Mechanicsville, South Carolina. It had been owned by a church that later burnt down and was relocated. Most of the graves were sunken, and most of the tombstones were broken or gone outright. They placed a huge group marker with the names of the known burials on it. The story said it was haunted by the spirit of a young child in antebellum clothes and a black shadow with red eyes tied to a story about a man who brought his victims to the graveyard because it was so remote to end their lives. We were excited to be there. When we arrived, the first thing we noticed was it was pitch black. It was so dark you couldn't see your hand in front of your face. It was because the graveyard was so overgrown with forest that it blocked out all the stars and moonlight. It was hot and muggy that night, but when you entered the graveyard, the whole thing was a massive cold spot. It must have been 85 degrees outside, but inside, our thermometer read 62. There was a feeling of dread around the place, like something didn't want you there, and when you entered, the air felt thick, like it was resisting you, and pushed you back. It was harder and harder to walk the further you went in. Finally, there was a sound like something rushing towards us, and we saw what looked like a black shadow with red eyes moving towards us. We ran out of there, and it was like the trees themselves were against, as it felt like they closed in and gripped our clothes, holding on as we tried to leave. We finally made it out, and when we went to leave, one of the car batteries was dead, though it was only months old, like something had drained it. We called a local tow truck, but the driver refused to go until morning because he said it was evil and haunted at night. We got pictures with so many orbs and shadows. One picture even showed moss that looked like a man shape hanging from a tree. We also got full EVPs of what sounded like angry whispers. We never did go back. One boring summer night, my friends and I were racking our brains trying to think of a cheap thrill to entertain us, and someone floated the idea of sneaking into this huge historic cemetery with graves from the 17 and 1800s out in the next town over. We had been there a few times before, but never at night, and it took us a little while longer to get there than normal. While going at night, certainly we had more of a thrill than going in the daytime, and it also meant the place was much harder to find, and when I say the boonies I mean it, way into the woods with the only lamppost for miles being the one in the front of the cemetery, but we found it. The friend who drove us, Matt, parked a little way down the road, close enough so we could get back to it quickly, but just beyond the light the lamppost radiated. Matt warned us to keep quiet, as the caretaker had a house somewhere on the grounds, and we followed his lead until we found a place we deemed safe. It was the top of a small hill which in the daytime would have been a wonderful view of the cemetery, which was really quite beautiful, but at night offered the sanctuary for us to smoke weed away from prying eyes. We chatted, passing the vape pen around, when I looked down the hill at the road. Guys? Standing near the lamppost was a man staring directly at us. We waited for a second, expecting him to yell at us or tell us to leave, but he stood there in silence, standing so still it felt unnatural. Everything about his appearance was obscured. The light shining behind him made him appear as a jet black figure. Based on his outline, we could tell he was wearing a hoodie with the hood up, but that was it. Matt pulled out his knife. "Okay, time to go," and we shuffled back down the hill, as quickly and quietly as we could, praying the guy wouldn't start chasing us. We made it to the car safely, but severely unnerved. Some of us were more willing to admit that than others. Who the hell was that guy? What did he want? Probably some guy just looking to scare us, Matt said, and another friend Richard replied, "I don't know, that was too weird." Eventually the word we were all waiting for came up. Ghost? Seriously? Matt said. The last graves buried there at that point were from over 100 years ago at least. A ghost from the 1800 in a hoodie? Fair point. But that didn't make the regular human theory any more plausible. This place was way out in the woods with nothing around for miles. No cars or gas stations. Hell, that was the one and only lamppost the road had. There was no public transportation that used the road the man could have been waiting for, because why would you need a bus stop on a back road in the middle of nowhere? He could have just been somewhere walking along the road, but to where and how? We had enough trouble making our way there in a car with headlights. This guy would have had to have been walking along the road for miles and miles through the pitch black woods at 2 a.m. There was just no conceivable reason why someone would be there at that hour. The conclusion we all settled on was that it had to have been the caretaker. He must have known we were there and thought it'd be fun to pull a Scooby-Doo scare on some meddling kids. But we all knew that didn't sit right either. It just seemed way too impractical. Calling the cops must have made much more sense. Matt did have a knife on him after all. If he'd have been a different kind of person, he could have easily used it. I think we went back there maybe one more time in the daylight, but it didn't have the same vibe to it anymore. I've since moved away and haven't seen those guys in years, but I do wonder if they're still as weirded out as I am about that night. When I was a teenager, I was coming back from a quinceañera late at night, with my aunt and her boyfriend. My cousin and me all packed into the car. At one point we had to stop at a red light set in the middle of the road on a median, and that is where I saw her. There was a woman standing there right in the median wearing a white dress. It looked worn and kind of torn in places, not like something you'd see anyone walking around in. She was making motions with her hands like she was trying to get cars to stop, like she expected someone to pull over. We all noticed her at the same time. I remember my aunt saying something like, maybe she'd come from a costume party or an event, and everyone just kind of went along with that. No one questioned it. It didn't even cross our minds in that moment. It may or may not have been a time of year for that kind of thing to appear. Lights changed and we drove off. No one paying her any more mind. It wasn't until years later that I heard about Resurrection Mary. When I read about her, it immediately brought back the memory of that night. The location and the white dress. It felt eerily similar. The story about Resurrection Mary describes her as a blonde, and the woman we saw definitely had dark hair. My husband used to work in Summit, not far from Resurrection Cemetery, and I have driven past that area at all hours since then without seeing anything unusual. Still, that night has always stuck with me. I wonder if I did see Resurrection Mary or another spirit, or perhaps it was just someone in costume. Who knows? Let me begin by saying I am in no way a ghost hunter. I'm a fan of ghost hunting shows, and I've had numerous paranormal experiences and some ghost encounters. So ghost hunting has always been something I've thought I'd be good at, but in truth I'm kind of nervous to do it more than I have. I don't use any fancy equipment, but an app that's called GhostTube. Before that, I used a different app for a few fun scares at sleepovers, and I got so freaked out by these apps I ended up deleting them after use. This app was one of the newer ones, and supposedly the best one so far. While I was visiting France, my friend wanted to visit the Père Lachaise Cemetery, one of the largest cemeteries in the world. It is home to a few famous people such as Oscar Wilde, who was the entire reason my friend wanted to go there in the first place. When we visited, I thought it would be fun to try ghost talk. My friend thought it was kind of silly, but she knows I like spooky stuff, so she just rolled with it. About a minute in, I get a response. Okay, cool. With these apps, I realize your phone can hear you and probably see things via the camera too, so I take responses with a grain of salt normally. I'm not thinking too much of it, nor is my friend. However, as we walk, the response becomes more frequent and I begin to talk back, and that's when the responses really picked up. I want to note here, I do have a history of psychics in the family. I like to think I have a bit of an ability, but mostly energy related. I have never felt like I was in danger with anyone who's responded to me. If anything, it felt like they were just taking a walk with us. And here's a breakdown of how the interactions went. Table. I laughed. There was no table around, so I just kept walking. I lived here. This one caught my attention. I responded, "Did you live near here or somewhere else in France?" Response, "I'm not from here." Me, "Oh, so you lived here, but you weren't from here? Is that why you're speaking English?" At this point, I felt like this was a man speaking to me, just a feeling, and they said, "Stop interrupting." Okay, it was definitely a man. My friend and I started laughing and we said we'd be quiet. After that, it felt like the person, presumably annoyed, left us. We passed by a mausoleum with a caved-in floor leading into a black hole. We commented on it. "Oh, that's creepy." We got a response. "Basement." "Yeah, it must lead to somewhere deep like a basement," I said. "That must be eerie." Immediately, I got the response, "Not necessarily." At this point, my friend started to look at my phone, like she couldn't believe that was happening. I got the feeling we were being joined by a woman. She followed us. It was a feeling like she was walking directly behind us, keeping pace, like if I stopped too quickly, she'd run into me. "Mother," she said. "Were you a mother?" I asked, "or is your mother here?" "Innocent," it replied. I forgot what I said in response, but I quickly got the comment, "Psychic?" My friend looked over at me wide-eyed. I laughed and said, "No, I'm not psychic. I just have this device. It shows you when you want to talk to me. So please continue to talk if you want." "Yeah, well listen," my friend said. We walked on. I commented on various graves and how pretty they were, or how sad I was about some being covered up or broken due to vandalism. As we passed one grave, I saw it was an angel and a very nice grave. "At least it's a pretty grave," I said. That's when we heard the device say, "It's what I want." "Really?" "Assuredly," the device replied. As we passed more graves, we got more replies. suffering. We said how sorry we were that they were feeling that way and we wish we could help. We even asked them if they could help us find Oscar Wilde's grave, seeing as this cemetery was big as a town. To this we got no response, but ended up finding his grave. It was about 20 minutes to closing time when the cemetery was due to close, and they would give a 10-minute warning by ringing a bell. That was the cue for visitors to head for the exit, otherwise you'd risk getting trapped in. Though I'm sure security would do surveillance after closing, but due to the size of the place it would probably take them a good while to find you, if they did in fact come looking for you at all. Oscar Wilde's grave had sadly been put behind glass due to people defacing it. All over the glass were lipstick marks, and even on the other side were small things people had thrown over the glass wall, such as notes and little toys. There were quite a few people around this grave when we heard the bell chime. As everyone left, we stayed for a moment so my friend could say something to him. I assured her it might not be him, because quite frankly I don't know if I'd hang around my grave if people kept ruining it, but we tried anyway. She told Oscar that she was a big fan, and that he's still very widely adored, but also that there was a gay-themed bar after him somewhere, and we got the response, hot. We died. Guess he was okay with the gay bar. I then asked, is there anything you want to tell us? And the response was, please go. We agreed and immediately walked away, realizing there was no one else around and the bell was now chiming. I'm walking, the device said. You're welcome to walk with us to the exit, I said, and a few cobblestone paths later we made it to the exit on time. I said maybe he was saying please go so we'd make it out on time. I actually felt like something followed me back to our hotel. I felt a heavy weight on me and was exhausted, and my brain felt cloudy and didn't feel right. I was afraid the app would notify me of more responses, so I deleted it. That night, I felt watched. However, I'm happy to say the next morning I felt much better and lighter. Maybe whatever followed me realized I wasn't listening anymore and left. Not sure why, but I felt like it was the woman who talked to us a bunch before. Nothing malicious, she just wanted to be heard. I hope you enjoyed my stories. Hey guys, it's Mort here, and thank you so much for listening. I hope that you have enjoyed tonight's collection of cemetery stories. It has been a good one. So just for those of you who might not be familiar or maybe don't listen to the end every time, I am going to be doing alternating Saturday videos. Next week will be a compilation just like last week, and the week after I have programmed kind of funky episode called Security Cameras. I might actually include the footage, but it's creepy stuff that's been captured. So I think it's going to be a really interesting video. Hopefully you guys enjoy it. I haven't recorded it yet, but the stories are quite promising. But with that being said, that is it for the week. I will see you again on Monday if you listen to the Mortis Media Mort's Bedtime Stories podcast over on all podcasting places, and if not, you will see me again on Tuesday for even more spooks. I believe the Tuesday video is Railroad? Pretty sure it's Railroad. Yeah, train and railroad stories. Again, not a super popular topic, but one I think is actually really interesting with some hella spooky stories. Anyway, have a wonderful weekend, friends. Stay awesome. Oh, and I wanted to give one final thank you to my members and patrons whose names you can see on screen. And if you'd like to get a bunch of exclusive content, you can follow links in the description to find out more. But for now, stay awesome, my friends, and good night.